Welcome to the Grow Your Business podcast. Listen in as we discuss all things business, growth and marketing with business owners, thought leaders and entrepreneurs. And now, here's your host, founder of Roundhouse, the creative agency, Saul Edmonds.
Oh, hey everyone. Welcome to the Grow Your Business podcast. I'm speaking with Ruth Kent today. Ruth, how are you?
I'm good, thank you, Saul. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for being on the podcast. Where are you? I always ask because a lot of people that we speak to on the podcast are in different parts of the world. But where are you? You're nearer to me.
I'm in Brisbane.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
right.
on the Bayside.
Oh yeah. Well, I used to live in the Bayside. Whereabouts?
Wynnum. Yeah.
Oh really? Yeah. No, I still live at Thornside.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
I was kind of in a weird way glad when not living in there anymore after the cyclone.
Yeah.
And we were talking about that for people listening who don't know, Brisbane just had a cyclone just fairly recently that fortunately wasn't, well, for some areas it wasn't great, but I was thinking about that. I was thinking, the poor people down where I used to live.
Yeah.
Getting hammered. So
yeah, well, I remember listening to all the news reports and they're talking about how that line of islands would be getting the first hit. And I thought, but I can see those islands from the bay. I can, like, when I walk along the bay, I can actually see, the outline of them. Yeah, exactly. And I thought, that's not very far away. So we definitely, I think we did cop the that first hit.
Yeah. Fortunately not as bad, I guess, as it could have been. I've always been, because we had talked about this as a family before, and when you talk about silly, random things that might happen and we go like, what if a tidal wave came, and sort of like hit the shore, and we'd always generally considered that perhaps, I mean, this is probably completely wrong, but that the islands would assist a little bit in shielding any initial impact from something to some extent. I'm sure the meteorologists listening would be like, what a fool. Why he's got no idea, but that's what I think anyway.
Well, I mean, it kind of worked for the winds. So
yeah. So maybe I'm completely right. So who knows?
You could be. Yeah, well, you'll have to get a meteorologist on.
Yeah. I'll have to fact check.
Yeah.
Anyone who wants to fact check me, just get in touch. But in terms of the I'm trying to find a good, interesting segue about weather to go into what you do, but I don't think I have one.
Well, I think you could say that stress levels were quite high at that time.
Yes.
That was a big one.
Yeah, no, 100%. So you're at the start of the podcast, like for people who don't know about you, in broad terms, wellness, mindfulness, but if you can give people like a bit of a snapshot about I guess what you do and just a short sort of annotated history about how you got to be like at this point now, like what were the things that led you to this point, Ruth?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm a workplace wellbeing consultant, trainer and coach. My main focus is obviously workplace wellbeing, which is narrow but broad at the same time, because you have the topic of well-being, which is obviously quite specific, but under that umbrella it's really broad. There's a lot of topics within the concept of well-being. So I typically, well, if I was going to start, I would say prior to doing my business, I was already an educator. So I worked mainly as an English as a second language teacher, facilitating learning in multicultural classrooms. And then I ended up in higher education teaching diploma students in health science to develop their academic and communication skills to be able to enter the second year of university. And from there, around that time, I started my business. My training is in psychology and public health. So that was what I qualified in. And I did numerous other trainings in For example, advanced mindfulness teacher training, professional level wellness coaching or health coaching. And all of that kind of came together, as well as the teaching skills, I guess, and facilitation skills came across to me creating my business. That was, more than 10 years ago. And I immediately fell into facilitating workshops in workplaces and corporate spaces. So I took those facilitation, education types of skills and working with groups, but I brought in the public health and the other aspects of wellbeing to create these workshops. So making sure that for me, there's a big focus on obviously the learning outcomes. So when I do my training, I'm not there to be, the show pony. I'm there to sort of make sure that the people start at one point and they end at a point that's entirely different, walking away with knowledge and skills and practical learnings, and also bringing in that coaching framework, I guess, in helping people to build incrementally and coach themselves through the process of change. And so anyone who kind of knows the workplace wellbeing landscape would agree probably that over the last 10 years it's changed dramatically. We've evolved, I think, just in general, humans and workplaces, but also we've been through a lot, obviously, in the last 5 years especially, and workplaces really had to scramble to catch up and look after that side of people's lives. And in doing that, also my business has evolved to respond to those changes. So what began as one-off workshops that were typically nice and lovely and helpful for people, which still occur. I still offer those. But my work has become more robust in terms of supporting wellbeing in a more comprehensive way in workplaces, because that's what they're needing now. So there's been legislative kind of advancements, and there's been more awareness in the world and in Australia in particular around how to support employees. So, it can look like training. It can look like working with the leaders to understand well-being and how to look after the well-being of their teams. So it's varied every time now. That's sort of a snapshot.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's extremely comprehensive, and it is a really complex kind of landscape, isn't it? Like I'm actually finding it's interesting on the podcast, because I sometimes, depending on the proximity, like in between podcasts too, I'll be like, oh, that's interesting, because there's sometimes common threads between things that, like, in your sort of industry, and then people who are specialists with remote workers to make projects better. But there's like these common, some of these common threads about, that changing landscape, I guess. Some of it, like we were touching on before the podcast started about COVID, about, one, acceptance of that's normal. It's like it's here to stay. People working from home, people working remotely, using remote teams, what that sort of looks like. So like in your experience, like say, working with, and this obviously very different from business to business, because some businesses, more people in a team might need to really be in the office for the specific job. Some don't at all. Like, in our industry, we can work from anywhere. And then, although I actually personally really cherish more than I used to, probably in the past, meeting people in person. Actually, it's sort of funny, because like when you don't have it as much, then when you do it, it seems a lot more fun and interesting than it used to be. So, but what do you find in terms of like some of the biggest challenges that, say, specifically leaders in a business have in this changing landscape? Say, in like a specific scenario where there's more people who are able to work from home, and it ends up being okay? Like, what are some of their biggest things that they speak to you about?
Yeah, it kind of depends a little, like you said, on the industry and what the makeup and the, you know, what they've actually got set up. And there's a variety of different things that I think can come up. One of them that tends to come up quite a lot is generational differences. So that's quite interesting because you have different, you could say cohorts if you think about generations as population groups, and you've got these different groups with obviously different ways of doing things and what they're used to and
what's acceptable.
What's acceptable, exactly.
Yeah, right.
Like what we do and what we don't do. And there's a kind of a culture within that.
Yeah.
And then there's the culture of the entire organization. And sometimes those two don't always see eye to eye.
Yeah.
And the expectations can be different. So younger or newer employees sometimes have different expectations when they're coming into into their roles, or as they're staying in their roles. Even the fact that we don't stay in our roles, as long as we used to. So if you've got people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, it used to be that we would have a role and that would be it for life a lot of the time.
Then you retire. And
then it's very kind of, whereas these days we've got the gig economy, we've got people stay in their jobs for 18 months or less, and there's a lot of shifting and changing. And then within that, there's the well-being side of it you were talking about, which involves things like, being able to switch off at the end of the day when you're working from home. For some people that's a bit of a struggle, but at the same time, we've got people who really depend on being able to work from home because getting to the office is actually a real pressure on their family. So people with, for example, young children in their family much prefer to be able to work from home because they save that commute time and they can be more available and be more flexible with their children's schedules, which is always tricky. So there's a lot of competing demands. And then I think leadership, you've got some who are just headstrong and they're saying, look, this is my way or the highway. That doesn't necessarily create a culture in the organization that's going to be fruitful and supportive in the long term. And you've got some that are trying to be receptive or be flexible, but just not sure how to do it. And then, as I said, then the well-being side of things, you've got this contrast. You've got the benefits of in-person interactions. Like there's a lot of psychological, emotional benefits from being and working together. There's also a great many for not and being flexible and working from home. And so for a leader to be able to balance that and address both of those is really tricky. I've seen organizations do it in all different kinds of ways.
It is tricky, hey? I mean, like there's like so much, like in any group dynamic, whether it's in a business or in like, say, a sporting club or group of friends, or, like you see, there's all those unknowns. Like even when I can just think from my own personal experience, lots of times where you feel like you kind of know somebody well, but you really have only had a certain sort of interaction with them and it may have been like for 10 years, but you don't really know, them in the same way that their family or like other people in their workplace might, or their friends might, and then things still crop up. So like with the idea of mindfulness, because I was looking at what you were talking about, I think on your website, that you started meditation when you were 15. Is that right? Yeah, when you were 15. So so that's obviously been like...
That was just a few years ago.
Oh, yes, of course.
That was 2010.
Sorry, I didn't add that for the people listening. And you've done like a lot in your business for the past 10 years. That would have been, it's like 8 years old. That's pretty cool. You started when you were 8. Genius.
No. Yes, yeah, you're right. No,
Genius child.
it was 1995 when I learned to meditate. So it was about 30 years ago.
Yeah, no, but so that's obviously been like I assume like a big part of informing. I assume like then coming down this kind of path, like it's been a part. It's been, for all the intents and purposes, kind of become more normal for you to think in that sort of way. But like when it comes to because that's obviously linked very strongly with then mindfulness and focus on particular things, and having like limited I'm sort of experienced myself doing martial arts, and that's been like a part of that. So I broadly understand that too. But for people who are being introduced, say, and when you go, "Hi, I'm Ruth, and we're going to talk about mindfulness," and I'm not that you say it like that, but like you're introducing it to people. How often do you find people's reaction to mindfulness is more of that surface level? They generally know what that means, obviously, because most people would, but when it comes to actually understanding, I guess it's implementation, because you were talking about you want people to go, home from things with real practical understanding. How often do you find people's first sort of introduction then to mindfulness is like the jump from their understanding to what it can really sort of achieve in the real world is like a large jump? Do you find that's fairly common, or people are more across it than you expect?
Well, look, I think these days the word is out there. It's not an unknown word. Mindfulness or meditation, those are not unknown. Whereas, in 1995 when I learned, I didn't tell people about it because it was a weird thing to do, and it was. I was sitting in a commune, and it was there's a whole story like to that.
It's more fringe, hey?
It was way more fringe, and it took a long time, for it not to be something that weird yogi people do. And I say that coming from that space, that was just the interpretation. That was just, general society didn't, and there was no way it was going to be in a workplace setting.
That's right.
We have some great, what are the predecessors, I guess, who are still doing really well and bringing it into the research field. You've got people who were in India in the 60s who were over there, but they were also Harvard students who brought the science back to Harvard and, various mostly American universities. And then we had the Dalai Lama supporting another one of the researchers to actually look at the science behind it. And without those things happening in the 80s and the 90s, in the 80s and the 90s, and then, it starting to become more accepted to see, hey, there's actually some evidence behind this, and there's actually some pretty good research to show that this works. It just took a lot longer for it to get into organizations. But, it has finally come in. And even 10 years ago when I was doing, introducing it to workplaces, I wouldn't say that everybody was across it. I would say most people even then would have probably heard of it, but not necessarily practiced it. But I think just as we move along every year, people are becoming more and more open to it. And I think that's just a fact of it infiltrating the world, in various different ways. It's coming into the education system slowly. It's coming into, certain sports. They're bringing it into sports science and sports coaching. They're bringing in breathing practices and short visualizations and mindfulness practices. So the more it becomes part of our collective experience in the world. And this might look kind of, what's the word? It might look very surface level, because you might be walking down the street and you see a shop window that has a reference to mindfulness, or you see some kind of, glossy magazine has mindfulness in it. Yeah. But the more we see it, the more it becomes part of who we, what we accept as normal. So, we get those layers as we walk through the world. And then when someone comes along and says, would you like to try mindfulness? You're going to be more open to giving it a try.
And there's more. Yeah. I mean, that's exactly right. But I mean, it's inevitable with any term or any idea that really has a much deeper sort of application and meaning to it. It's always going to be used in like any number of superficial sort of ways. Like people throw stuff around all the time, this and that. I mean, that's kind of the nature of society, and it's used for marketing and this and that. I mean, that's always, but you are right too. I mean, the positive advantage of that is that the exposure, it's like things just being exposed to you. Then ultimately it's up to the person to go, to continue just hearing it and not like listening to it. If that makes sense, like, and actually going, what does it actually mean? So at which point, like for people who, because I always find it really interesting when, because I know I do this too. I'm sure I do. Like you have a term, or you feel like you understand something, like it might be this idea of mindfulness, say, and unless you necessarily have a certain experience that might often actually just have some practical application for your life, where you see some like result from it, it can continue to just be a term in your mind that's got a certain superficial level meaning. And that's not meant to be negative anyway, but you don't really have a deeper understanding. So for people listening, like for someone who thinks about it and talks about it and helps people in relation to it, could you give, like, say, a definition of mindfulness? And I know this sounds, people are like, I know what mindfulness is, but it's always great to have that, because sometimes you actually don't know. Like sometimes so how would you define it, Ruth?
Well, I guess just based on what you've just asked, and also tying back to what you asked previously, sometimes I would say still quite a lot when I'm talking to groups of people and I talk about mindfulness, I'll have people say, oh, I tried that, it didn't work. Or I can't do that. I can't do mindfulness. And you kind of say, well, tell me about that. And they'll say, well, I did it. And when I closed my eyes and I sat there, and then I couldn't stop thinking. I couldn't stop thinking. And that in itself is mindfulness. And I think if we go all the way back and say, closing your eyes and just paying attention to what is going on behind the scenes is the first step in mindfulness. But if you were going to give a broader definition, you could say that it is a moment by moment awareness. So it's not even focusing on one thing and following it. It's focusing on the moment as it arises, which is all the time. Awareness of your thoughts, which is that thing that someone said to me, I close my eyes and I can't stop thinking. So that's the first step. On your thoughts, on your feelings, on your bodily sensations, because we're getting
breathing,
all twinges, breathing, tightness, all the stuff that goes on physically, thoughts, feelings, bodily sensations, and the surrounding environment all at the same time. But you're doing all of this through a gentle, nurturing lens. And that's the part that most people leave off.
Right.
They're paying attention, but they're also getting annoyed at themselves, rather than just accepting that this is the experience that I am having.
Just getting annoyed at the fact that they can't stop thinking. But,
exactly.
But it's sort of, it's funny because they're doing that anyway. But like it's like when you because I guess is it also perhaps like a different way of defining it or looking at it is it's to pick out that, because there's any myriad of things going on at any point in time, and you're not able to generally focus on all of them at once, obviously, because you just can't. But then you go, I'm choosing to focus on my breathing, or like really go, because like you don't, because you can't be like 24/7, because you just have to do some things to exist and go on, and then you're talking to this person, you're doing this task, but then slow it down and focus on one thing at the individual point in time, like to pick that thing out too. But I guess, like, say, as a part of a definition, like just to add on to what you were saying, which was good, that sort of explains it really well. So then so why do that? Like, what's then the advantage for people? Because, you know, I'm just trying to get granular, probably even for myself, because I know, I sort of know, but then drilling down is to then go, okay, well then why is that good? Why focus on that? How's that going to help?
So what you kind of, when we think about mindfulness, so we think about it being as this awareness. We have this awareness all the time. So when we step into being mindful, all that we're doing is stepping into an awareness that is always already there.
Yeah.
But most of the time we're in this other mode where we're externally focused, and our mind is being kind of pummeled by all the things on the outside, right? So when we bring that awareness in, which is, like I said, that focus on the thoughts, feelings, bodily sensations, and surrounding environment, there is always that awareness there. What we're doing, what you were talking about, is the actual process of doing it. The process is to start with, for most people, they'll start with the breathing. So they'll focus through that process on typically breathing. Doesn't have to be. For some people, they focus on the light of a candle. Some people focus on the breathing in their stomach, the sort of the in and out breath of their belly. Some people focus on the breath at the tip of the nose. Some people focus on the breath going down, like through the nose and down the back of the throat. So, you know, I guess at the end of the day, or I should say also some people focus on a mantra. The point of it being that, and I've been through training through mantra and through the Buddhist mindfulness breath technique, so breathing through the nose, and they were different at the beginning for a day or two, and then at the end of the day they were exactly the same in terms of the outcome of what they were doing. So my point is that where you choose to focus, that's the process that you're choosing to undertake to get to that point. That is, you know, you could choose any number of things. The point is that you're bringing your brain every single time back to the point of focus. And when you're doing that, there is a number of things going on. So let's say we'll stick with the breathing through the nose. You're constantly bringing your attention, that's attention, not awareness. So you're bringing your attention to the breath. And so you're telling your brain, you're giving it something to do. And this is the trick that a lot of people get caught up by, because they say, well, I closed my eyes and then all my thoughts came in. So that happens to everybody. And for me, it can take a good 10 minutes of that thinking before I can get my brain to actually focus properly on my breathing. So they call it the monkey mind, and it is like a monkey. It just keeps running everywhere, and you have to keep bringing it back.
It's chattering.
Keep bringing it back. Exactly. And the reason that we want to do that is very, very extensive. So firstly, you've got the immediate physiological and mental benefits of doing it. So you're moving away from the fight, flight, freeze response, the stress response that we spend most of our day going through, into the parasympathetic response. So parasympathetic response is part of our autonomic nervous system. So what we're doing is moving out of the stress response and we're letting our body and our physiology move into a state of rest and digest or healing. This is really beneficial on so many levels, physically and mentally. So we're doing that as a result of in the moment of doing it. So we're having an effect on our blood pressure, our breathing rate is slowing down, our heart rate is slowing down. And that doesn't just happen within the time frame that we're doing it. It has, ongoing effects throughout the rest of the day. And if we're doing this consecutively, it can have ongoing effects throughout weeks and weeks and, into really having a good impact on people's blood pressure, for example. Obviously not one time only. It has to be consistent and, for a really long time. There's also significant brain changes. So our brains literally change after even 8 weeks of doing this. So we have changes in the amount of white matter. We have various areas within our brain that grow bigger. So these kinds of things happen. But also, so that's more physiological outcomes. But then we also have, and just going back on the physiological, we are looking for our body and brains and ourselves as people to be able to tune into that attention, not just in that moment, but in a sustained way. And when we catch ourselves in various situations in the future, having an interaction with somebody, having maybe an altercation, a conflict or something, this is where it can really come into play, because we are training our brain to be able to become aware. And when we become aware, we're able to notice this great quote, the between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in that space is our ability to choose our response. So it's about finding that space. And when you meditate for a long time, or when you practice mindfulness, you start to become aware of that space, so that later on, when you're out in the world doing things, you've got the stimulus and you've got the response, but you notice the space in between, and you can choose a lot of the time what your response is going to be. So this is how it can affect your emotional intelligence or your ability to have better relationships down the track.
Is it true to say that then it's going to assist in your ability to not be as reactive to situations?
Yeah, I mean, ideally that's the outcome. And you don't have to be practicing all day, every day, walking around at the top of a mountain, surrounded by nature, to be able to create that response. It takes a bit of time, I think, but it is an outcome that can occur or does occur for many people, that they start to see what we're doing is we're witnessing our thoughts, first of all. And, when we sit down and we notice, what am I thinking? And what do I keep thinking that same thing? And every day I'm going to sit down and I think that same thought again. And you start to kind of notice those thoughts like strings, and you're picking them up, and you get that sense of observation and objectification. So you can hold it up and say, well, is this actually true? Or could this be behind the reason behind me drinking a hell of a lot more than I should on Friday night? Or
instead of just accepting that that's a thing that's coming into your head, and you just let it pass through, like the streams just coming through, and you're seeing it go past, and you're not just, like you said, to pick it up. I mean, that's the just like a metaphor, I guess, for what you do, I guess, in meditation when you focus on one thing, isn't it? Like you just pick out that one. Yeah, might be, like you were saying before, that one sensation. So it's really, just a method by which, like, I guess in sport too, like, people readily accept that you do this in sport and you increase your leg strength, and this is going to have this benefit. And that's like a logical, thing that everyone just kind of intuitively knows. But I guess because that's easy to like see the physical, like you can see and feel those results, that's easier to digest than mentally, because that's its own skill you got to build up, isn't it? And like you were saying, like that actually has those physical changes in your brain too, which is really interesting. It's just sort of flies in the face, I guess, of, well, maybe not, accepted fact, but it gets back to like things that people just think that you have always thought something, and you don't have any reason to change that thought because nothing else has jumped in front of you and said like, hey, that's different. And sometimes if it does, you go, no, that's not true. And you don't even know why you're saying it's not true. You just are, like, you're just being reactive to it.
Yeah.
But that helps to. So when it comes to, say, then I'll just ask you again, because I think it's partially for me, but for people listening too, to get a definition about certain terms that they broadly kind of think they know about, but when people talk about emotional intelligence too, because that's obviously, once again, like it's great that is a conversation point and people talk about it and hear about it, and it's a big thing. But what's a good definition of emotional intelligence that you'd be able to give people, Ruth?
Yeah, so I go a lot with the work of Daniel Goleman, and there's different sort of interpretations of his work, but in general, the way that you can look at it is, first of all, your self-awareness, and that's, you'll see, I think if I talk about this, the way mindfulness can play into that, but self-awareness and self-regulation, because it's one thing to be self-aware, it's another thing to be able to regulate, and this is, again, where mindfulness comes in, because you're able to sort of regulate the emotions or regulate
self-control,
your energy in response to what's going on around you. And then that is also connected to the social awareness and social regulation. So all of these work together with the connection of empathy as well. So if you think of all of these as working together to create a level of being able to interact with each other, as well as understand ourselves. So there's the interplay of knowing who you are and knowing your own responses and reactions and being able to regulate those, but then also being able to interact with people, with groups of people, or with certain, individuals, and in a kind of empathetic and harmonious, or empathic and harmonious way. So that would be the way that I explain emotional intelligence. And you were sort of talking before about the thoughts, and I just wanted to say that one way I've heard it described that I really like is that when you start practicing meditation and you're sitting down and you're following those thoughts and you're seeing those thoughts coming, you can consider it to be like either clouds, some people call it clouds, or even cars on a highway, and you're kind of watching these cars going past. So those are thoughts, kind of streaming past you while you're sitting there. And what you'll notice over time is, oh, look, there's that green car, kind of circles back around. There's that green car again, and every so often that green car keeps popping up, the exact same car. That's that thought that keeps on popping up. And so the more that you're sitting there, the more that you practice, the more you'll start to notice those repetitive thoughts or those repetitive types of ways of looking at things. And typically what we tend to do is we can't focus in the present moment. We're constantly thinking about, what am I going to be doing next? So most people, when they sit down to meditate, usually start thinking about, well, oh, I wish I could hurry this up so that I could go and send that email. And, oh, what am I going to say in that email? I better start writing it now. And what are we having for
Yeah.
dinner? I've got to make sure my husband picks up, that from the shops, and don't forget to do this for the kids. And, so you go through your laundry list while you're meditating, because we
Yeah.
can't focus in the present moment. We keep on thinking either of the future, or some people, and depending on, what's been going on, tend to focus on the past, like, I should have written that, I shouldn't have pressed send on that email, it wasn't finished, there was a mistake in that report, and keep on going back to what should have happened. When we can stay focused and when we can be more present, we can be more responsive to the situation at hand. So if you think of workplaces, first of all, you've got the attentional training. So these days we are just overrun by everything. We're constantly getting pinged. If you sit down, many people are sitting down to these, overscheduled calendars, and they're getting pinged in every direction from their phone, from their email, from their Teams, from wherever. And it's really, really hard to focus. But if they can focus, they get that sustained output in their work. It's going to be more productive for them, for the teams, and they're also going to be able to be more responsive to the moment, and that is sometimes critical to the job. That can be down to
Definitely.
someone making a fatal mistake or a critical mistake in their work that can have really, really significant impact. So it does, and it can make a difference to how someone works and how productive they are, but also the safety and the health of the workers as well.
It feels like you can almost boil it down to, the ability or the lack of to focus on any given thing at any point in time. Like, because you're almost everything that we're talking about. I just because in my job, I'm doing at any given point a number of sort of things where I have to use the creative part of my brain, but then also the more engineering logical part, because I have to think of practical aspects for its application, but be creative at the same time. And I'm always having a constant struggle, which I think I'm pretty good at these days, but sometimes it just doesn't, it just kind of falls apart, where you're thinking of any number of projects of the same type at the same moment. And it becomes it's like pretty, it fries your brain. In that term that I know people certainly fries my brain. I had a fry of the brain episode last night. Was like, I just can't. It was like all the projects were calling out to me, like, Saul, you have to do this. And I was like, be quiet. And I told them all to be quiet. And then I just had to stop. And so, that obviously worked, because then I just ended it and shut the door for the moment. So that was like a form of reset. But it's interesting, because all these little physical kind of triggers I find really interesting too, because I play squash, and so in order to sometimes, as like nerdy sort of squash players, like, you look at what the the pros do, and you hear like what they have to say, and there's this thing that I've observed that's very common, and then when I've tried to use it, it's got like great real world application, which is that because it's probably not just specific to squash, but like it's a good way to explain it for me, where it can all happen very, very quickly, and there's like a number of points can be over in a very quick amount of time. So to reset, like in between rallies, it's sometimes it's as easy as just shutting your eyes and just taking a deep breath or two.
Yeah.
And that actually does the trick. And it's surprising that it still sort of surprises me, because I've I've done that and it works incredibly well. Of just going, okay, just reset and then just take that second or two to do that. And it works. But I still find it really interesting that those physical sort of triggers have such a huge effect. So with that in mind too, because you talk about yoga as well in what you do. How big a part or where does that actually come into what you do? Do you do that with people in some instances, or is that or like how do you actually use that in your business, if at all?
These days, to be honest, not as much, not really. I used to teach, but these days I take probably the concepts, and bring, some of the concepts around the breathing practices, for example. So those come into, some of the trainings that I do. And, I think, like I said, given my background is in, training is in public health, I always take those types of practices like mindfulness and yoga and those sorts of things and find the evidence base behind them and bring those into work with populations. So, with groups. So, so that's really where it comes in these days. I think back in, 11, 12, 13, I was teaching, at the physical practice, but now I use it for myself. I don't necessarily teach it.
Yeah, because it can be, I would imagine, like it's probably not applicable in, various workshops and things that you're doing anyway. You're not going to get everyone to get their yoga mats out and start doing the downward dog, I suppose, are you?
No, not really. But I mean, what you can take from it, I think, which is important, is the energy aspect of it, which it can sound that doesn't sound very evidence-based. It doesn't have a clear-cut way of describing it. But at the end of the day, people who sit at their desks all day and don't move are going to have their energy depressed, and just getting up and moving, and it doesn't have to be doing yoga, but getting up and stretching and moving and potentially, doing something with their musculoskeletal system is going to improve. That's
to do with a blood flow too, I suppose.
Their blood flow,
generally,
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, that's it's interesting because I think it's a great blend, one of like how you talk about with the mix of evidence-based sort of things that you've obviously spent a lot of time and energy and studying, and then things that are a bit more hard, in an evidence-based way to grasp. But I always find it interesting because at the end of the day, when there's something that may not be evidence-based in terms of like then its application, or there's not as much evidence out there, not as many, reports have been written on it, but somebody has the experience of it and it works, then, if there's enough people that do that, then there's like a groundswell for it to become kind of in its own way evidence-based, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but not in the way that that term is usually used. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that the practical, people accept that, like things we were saying before, that when you exercise, that's good for you. And there's obviously, and broadly speaking, but that broad term, you could drill down and there's lots of evidence for that. But if you had gone back to, I don't know, maybe say in sports science, for example, if you'd gone back to the 50s or 60s or like the 40s, that wasn't like a thing. There was just, they would do stuff and they would exercise and they'd become strong and they would beat the other person in a race, and everyone would just accept that. And that was the evidence that they were fitter because they won. or the, and that's oversimplifying it, but, and it's, I find it really like great and interesting now that there's this blend of those two sort of aspects that, because I know that it's important too, especially, sort of maybe you can elaborate on this as well, that when you go to a business and you say, hi, I'm Ruth Kent and here's what I do, and there's, this evidence for why this works when you're talking to people, how much weight does the evidence in that way have for most businesses that you're going to, as opposed to just going for what they already know is kind of good? They know, having good well-being, like, because that's more in the public eye. Like, is there one that's more important than the other more often for people, you find?
Well, I mean, that's an interesting question. I think, like to catch up on sort of the work that I've been doing the last few years, it is more around supporting organizations, not just with, so there's different ways of supporting well-being in the workplace. And if we go back 5 or 10 years, those who were doing it potentially as a nice thing, to attract people to their business, to say, well, we offer yoga classes, we offer free meditation at lunch, we offer, free fruit and things like that. Yeah. Whereas in the last 5 years or more recently, they've started to understand that there's a whole lot more that needs to be done, and we need to take that systemic view, which I think the public health gives me, and look at what are some of the things going on that are contributing to the stress or to the situations at hand. And the way I see it is that we can come at it from two levels, and the first level is the systemic level, where we look overarchingly at preventing some of the risks that are coming up. So here I'm talking about psychosocial hazard management, and that's a sort of a legislative thing which businesses should be doing. And if you look at some of the governing bodies, they say that they're going to be going in and checking that these checks are in place. And we can look at the job demands, and we can look at the work structure and things like that to see how we can prevent some of these issues. But at the same time, the individuals also have to be equipped. So on the one hand, we're looking at the system. On the other hand, we're looking at the individual, and both of those play together. So in terms of evidence-based, some organizations will go with that. Some of them are just going to go with compliance anyway. They're going to say, look, I need to do this because it's part of, I'm going to get in trouble if I don't. And we're starting to see.
Yeah, that's the catalyst for them doing it in the first place, right?
I don't want to get fined. Basically. So when we look at those things, and then we think, okay, I can have a look at people's workflow. I can do, right to disconnect. I'm going to make sure I don't call them too late. There's no bullies. They might say those kinds of things, but they're not going to be able to fully, in my opinion, and some others that I've spoken with, they're not going to be able to fully get across that without being able to have the systems or the structures in place where the individuals are able to manage their well-being and able to express, so have that that psychological safety between the people and between the leaders to be able to communicate what's going on. So if that's not there, they're not going to be sharing readily when there is a toxic situation going on that's turning into bullying, or they're not going to come across and be like openly talking about the increased job demands and the pressure on their plate.
Yeah, because that's a tough thing, isn't it? That's like a tough thing. I mean, I don't know if I would, I'm not in that and haven't been in a employer-employee relationship, for almost forever, like having our own business. So but I get it, but I mean, there's like a lot of things that I just simply, like, even if they weren't more intense kind of things, that I just wouldn't share. It just aren't going to share with people, for any number of reasons. So, I mean, all of that makes, the idea of having, a sort of a safe environment more important. But I find it's sort of, the term psychological, sort of safety too, because I know that term, is often sort of, thrown around in sort of such a way where it's very easy to deride it, like in that, oh, are you, it means like everything's like too safe or whatever. But I think that in itself, I mean, that's probably a natural evolution of how people interpret any number of things. They don't like this, they don't like that. That's just people, and maybe in Australia even more. I don't know, because of sort of, they're like, yeah, what are you talking about, mate? Like, it's just like psychological. What do you have to be like unsafe about? People just rubbish it, in Australia. That's just like an Australian thing. But I think it's always potentially a shame, because it can overshadow like the real important aspects, like things you were talking about, is that are legitimate, things that actually, if they're addressed, can make things easier and make things sort of better for everyone. And potentially it doesn't just have to be the negative sort of spin on it. It's like, you see that like on any, I mean, you hear people talking about it in this way or that way. And I mean, there's a lot of different shades of grey to all of this, like like, I'm sure you probably have like a million stories about, how workplace leaders or employees deal with people, and like, I can only imagine, like the different stories. But I actually really I was looking at your site again. I've been looking at things you've been saying, Ruth, and I'm going to bring them up, because you didn't expect this, did you?
No.
No, you didn't. No, but
okay. It's public, so
yeah, it's not like it's a secret or anything.
No.
But I really and I'd like you to sort of, since we're talking about psychological safety, I found this sort of interesting, and you can expand on it. Say on your website that they're sort of soft skills that are really hard. And I thought that was kind of, I broadly understand that, but can you expand on that by what you mean by them being soft skills?
So that's the term, that has come up through the ages, and I think I typically put that in quotation marks, because soft skills are not easy, and they're probably one of the hardest things for people to be able to develop.
They're more subtle.
Exactly, and they're related to our ability to when we come back to self-awareness, express emotions, understand our emotions, regulate ourselves, interact with others. Right. And this obviously affects our ability to work with others, manage others, and ultimately, affects your career progression. And, as we continue down the path of AI, it's going to become more and more important that we are self-aware and that we are able to be authentic, because our authenticity is what is going to separate or differentiate us from AI, as well as the automation that's just going to continue to happen in the world. Yeah. So we're going to be more and more, more and more reliant, I guess, on machine learning, automation to take over large parts of our workload. And anything that can be taken over will. What can't be taken over, at least as far as I can see, is this is the soft skills, is the human skills. Like those are the skills that we're going to have to continue to cultivate and continue to use into the future. Whereas, you know, we're seeing many, many jobs where a large part of what they're doing is getting automated or is getting, you know, put to the side. So what it boils down to is how can we communicate? How can we maintain and continue relationships? Because this is the key part of what is going to create workplaces that work well together. And, you know, we look at this and then we look at the increasing job demands that people are under, and, you know, they're managing multiple projects at the same time. So being able mentally to handle that and then be able to communicate effectively across teams while maintaining that self-awareness and self-regulation so that we can communicate and transmit the information across without having conflict, which then may escalate into the psychosocial hazards. You know, this is why the soft skills are so important, because it's so easy for the conflicts to arise now. And we need to be, you know, on top of it. So that takes training and practice.
Yeah, I mean, that's in the big flurry of sort of explanation you had there. When you were saying, it was like, wow, that sounds like that's quite a task to do all those things, but you know, not in any negative sort of way, but the fact that it is like that's tricky. But like then I guess the thing that jumped out to me then too is that then that's all then linked back to mindfulness, like to be more subtle is to be more subtle is to break things down more, and I guess just to take the time, like to actually go, or even just a moment to reflect on it instead of just responding. And it doesn't have to be, you don't have to sit there like for 30 seconds, like, well, people are like, what are you going to say? You know, it was like, sorry, I'm just being mindful. You know, it's like, you're taking too long, hurry up. You know, you're supposed to be quicker at mindfulness. You know, it's like, but like, however long, but that's just then practice too, right? I mean, that's just, it's like a real physical, like it's obviously mental skill, but then part of that is linked to, you know, all those other things. Things aren't an island, you know.
Well, then, you know, coming back to what we were saying earlier, you've got, you know, you've got a practice. If you keep a practice on a daily basis and then you drop into mindfulness throughout the day at the right time, you are building that muscle and you are literally changing your brain so that when you do end up in those situations between the stimulus and the response, instead of going straight into reaction mode, you do have that pause, but it's a micro pause. It's a tiny pause. It's not, that doesn't have to be something that happens during that time of the interaction with the person. It's so subtle and so small that they're not even going to notice. But because your awareness is so much higher, of yourself and your automatic reactions, you're able to often catch yourself before it becomes,
and that's just practice.
Hey?
That's just like doing it more.
The muscle.
It's like everything. I mean, it's kind of, you could really, I feel pretty safe in saying that kind of almost applies to everything. The more you do things, I mean, that was like that was the thing that was always, you know, super drilled into me any time I do sport, it's the same thing. You just do, it's like, and I'm just getting back to say things like squash is like that, you know, the pros sort of say, and I've put it and I've tried it and it's true, is the more you do like solo practice of just hitting the ball in one way over and over and over and over and over again, it's a form, it's actually, now that I think about it, it's actually kind of a form of sort of meditation, because you're doing the same activity over and over again, and you're focusing on this one thing repetitively, and you're just getting, without realizing, you're just getting, there's also muscle memory there too, but just the focus of looking at, you know, and just in very little micro ways, like you were talking about. There's a little subtle sort of ways. But when there's, say, when you've done workshops and various things with business owners and people in the business, have you had any say things that jump out from leaders in business or the business owners where they've come into a workshop or something that you've facilitated, and they've had a particular idea of what they want to get out of it, and then what they've actually gotten out of it has been vastly different, or really, and has really surprised them? Have you got any sort of stories about things like that?
Yeah, I have. I have a few, but one that happened quite recently that I can remember, it brings a smile to my face because I wasn't expecting it. But I did some training with some leaders here in Brisbane on a leadership day that they were having, and I think I was pre-warned that one of the leaders was not particularly open to this type of thing, this topic. And they said, but the rest of the room should be pretty fine, so they were kind of giving me the read of the room, and I said, yeah, that's fine, no worries, and did the training, and at the end of the training, I was leaving, I'd said goodbye and wrapped it all up, and I bumped into this fellow, and he said to me, without being prompted, he just said, that was one of the best workshops I've done on this topic in my whole career. And I mean, he was close, wow. He's close to retirement. And he said, I've done these before. I thought it was going to be another one of those types of, workshops. And it was really different. And I didn't know who he was at the time. And then I went and spoke. Just as I was leaving, I spoke with that original person who told me the read of the room, and he said, this guy, the one that he'd mentioned, loved it. And I said, I think I just spoke to him. Mm-hmm. And he said, yeah, that was the guy. So that was great, obviously great feedback. And I think what it kind of tells me is that we can look at things in different ways. We don't have to come in with the preconceived notion and just brush things off. I've heard it before. I've heard this before. I'm not going to be doing this again, because we're changing. The world is changing, and people who are open to ideas, hopefully take away new things. So, I mean, that was obviously a good experience. So, I mean, trying to think of anything else, but, I think at the end of the day, it's whether you're open to, hearing something.
Yeah. I mean, you could, yeah. And that's obviously true in that instance, but I would say probably, not being in that room, but from how you framed that in the first instance, is that my assumption would have been that if that particular person had gone to a number of similar things, or things that he thought were similar things in the past that maybe he sort of had to go to, and yours was the first that he had this different experience, that to me, from a evidence-based perspective, shows me that, like, from the evidence, I feel like I can assume that there was something different in what you did, or the angle you put on it, or how you said it, or because he responded to you more, or any number of factors that made that really different to him, because, or that he previously had some realization about the whole thing, but that seems unlikely because he'd been to like other things. So there's also that too. Sometimes you can just be saying the same thing or similar things, but the way you say it, and like the energy, or I mean, like the underrated thing of the amount of passion like people put into the same words to the same group of people can have like polar opposite effect. I mean, that's to me like a really underrated aspect of anything like that. And you've got this interesting mix too of, study in different sort of areas, and this mixture, which to me, like if I was there, that's an appealing mix, because you've done this and you've looked at it from this angle and this angle and this angle, and you've come to this like different conclusion. I'm not sure why that's appealing to me, but it is. It sort of has a certain appeal. I'm sure I'll work it at some point in the future.
I guess you could say that it might give a fresh perspective on, so it might be, like you said, the angle on certain topics that, if you come and you've heard it all from a certain point of view all the time, and then maybe if it's coming in from a different.
And it doesn't have to be super different always. It doesn't have to be really different. It can just be, I mean, we don't know what those other experiences were, but maybe like it was that, it was coming more from a, one particular side of what you generally talk about, as opposed to, this broader sort of perspective. But actually, like as we're getting sort of near to the end of the podcast, I just want to ask this other specific question, because I was really curious about it after reading some stuff about you, Ruth, which is that I want to know what is biomedical meditation therapy, because I'm sure if there's anyone else out there, you can like kind of work out what it might be, but what is it?
So as I said, I like to go with evidence-based, but I also have, a strong meditation practice. And so when I was looking for further training in teaching mindfulness, that was a course that spoke to me, because it was the combination of mindfulness and meditation with looking at the biomedical aspects. So everything, in terms of, we were talking about the research base of things, there is now thankfully quite a lot of study in those areas. And, so this was looking at the different aspects, for example, a module on compassion focused therapy, a module on what they call non-sleep deep rest or yoga nidra. And so looking at the practices, in their historical methods, but then looking at the modern scientific lens of, so what are the actual benefits, or what are the researched benefits of these particular practices. And when you break it down into those more specific components, you can see that there are some more specific benefits that come out for each of those. So, that's where that comes from.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And like I said before, I do like that sort of blend. And I think perhaps the appeal then also for other people too is that is not only just the information itself that you're giving, but for me, there's an implied like thing about that you've gone to the effort to look at it from different angles, which has it sort of implies a range of different things to me about, that which you do talk about, that you're a lifelong learner too. So that's, don't you, Ruth? You say that on your website. Yeah. As you talk about that. True. Yeah. I mean, I really resonate with that too. Like I'm always really curious about what people do and how they do it and why they do it. So
yeah. Well,
I know other people do like that too. Like that's important to some people.
Yeah, I just think just talking on the evidence base is that, anyone in my position, I think, has to be wary or careful of the fact that people are, when you're doing a training, you're automatically in a position where people are looking to you for information and guidance or learning in a particular area, and that you've got to be very careful that you're doing it with within your scope and within your what's the word? I guess like with best practice in mind, and not leading people astray or creating situations where people are believing certain things about something, which may be appropriate or may not. And I guess I want to point to probably what's been in the media lately is that apple cider vinegar, documentary that was on Netflix. And I don't know if you saw that.
No, I didn't.
I think.
What was that about?
Long story short, it's about an Australian woman who kind of bluffed her way through social media to have people believe that she had extensive brain cancers and tumors, and that she was treating them from a holistic perspective, and was
to sell a product then?
Sell products and to
right.
Get charity and all this type of thing. And it was all a fraud-based situation. And the documentary, well, it's not documentary, it's sort of a drama documentary, is really, really well done. And there's a lot of angles to it, but I think the angle that I'm kind of getting at here is that in a position of, I guess, quote unquote authority, that I might be in, when I'm guiding people, is to be really, really careful and mindful of what people walk away believing, and ensuring that I'm not leading people astray with the kinds of areas that, if I were to talk about mindfulness, for example, making sure that there's always an evidence base behind what I'm doing, so that people are making the informed decisions for themselves around their health and their well-being, because ultimately that's what you want. You don't want people to, harm themselves.
No, that's right. But then it's a tough, I can only imagine that's like quite a tough balance to strike, because you want to also be like forthright in what you think.
Yeah.
Like you want to be, I believe in this, but yeah, I mean, once you've got your framework and, and you've done it so many times, and you can like see the results and like hear feedback from people, that becomes easier and easier. I mean, I imagine, but I mean, there's a level of, I would say, justifiable paranoia generally in sort of medical and health. I mean, I know a number of friends and other people who, they got big insurance. It's like, it's tough. I mean, I can only imagine that's like for medical, practitioners more, that I'm sort of speaking about, but it's those same things apply about, advice, with being specific, but, to try to avoid as much as you can the sort of appearance that you're being, overly wary because you don't want to get sued. That's sort of, because that's a real thing. Like people are like, I just want an answer. And like, but do you want the answer that I would give you? Like it might not be. But I mean, that's all. That's a part of the gamut of how people interpret things, and there's a lot of that you can't control. Obviously, you just have to do what you do well and in the most responsible way. Hey, like you.
I think at the end of the day, it's just when you talk about the public health and the biomedical meditation therapy and things like that, is knowing research, understanding how to read research, and understanding how to communicate that effectively.
Yeah.
So that you're not sharing this random, study of 12 people that happened that if they ate these particular berries and then suddenly they could jump from the top of a building and fly through the air, and therefore everyone should be able to do that, So it's about being able to understand academic research and what actually is evidence and what is just
hearsay.
Yeah, or nice, but not necessarily robust evidence.
Yeah, it's a factoid. It's just like a factoid that's been.
Well, yeah, or it's just a random, this is kind of going off on a tangent a bit, but it comes down to the cherry picking of information where people go,
Yeah, no, 100%.
This study says this, therefore everything, everything about this particular thing is true. Whereas what we want to do is look at, well, how many times has that study been repeated and been shown to be true? And do we have a meta-analysis of this, or do we have like a gold standard study? So then we can say, okay, that's looking a little bit more like good, strong evidence that I can talk about. Otherwise, I'm not just going to grab some random topic and start sharing it.
Maybe I just had a funny thought is that maybe better mindfulness practices would actually help people overall be less likely to cherry pick things in that way.
Well, maybe.
Because there's that sort of a correlation between, I'm sure I probably do that to some extent, and everyone without even realizing it. But if you are more mindful and you're more like taking even that moment to go, oh, I really like that. Like I like particular things and I'm much more inclined to go down that path because I like it. That's very normal. But then have a good, call it skepticism, call it mindfulness. Are they two sides of the same coin almost?
Essentially, you might be able to catch yourself, with what you're thinking or what physical reaction you're getting, and just stop for a moment and say, well, is that actually true, or should I just take a moment?
Either way, it's probably good to do it, because then, like, even if it's not just like, you get branded as like the skeptical person who just like questions everything, at least at the very least, with the right, equivalent other person, it can open up like a interesting discussion that hopefully doesn't turn into an argument, and you can have because I love when you can have a great debate, like a friendly debate, which isn't a debate in that, aggressive sort of sense where you can go, I think this, and the other person's like, well, I don't agree because of this. That can be like really, really fun and really sort of engaging in the right spirit. Yeah. There's a lot of then correlations to everything we've been talking about in terms of mindfulness, I feel. Okay, so with that in mind now, Ruth, you've got, you told me earlier you've got a couple of quotes, which we always have on this podcast. So what are they? What are your quotes?
So I'm going to share one quote. I've got two quotes, but I'm going to share one that I grabbed onto at the beginning of my, starting my business, because it kind of, it speaks to the way that I've approached my life, but also I think is a really good reminder, and it kind of is the seed for the name of my business, which is Sunrise Well, which is that each day is a new opportunity. It's a new opportunity, and so therefore we have a new chance to make a difference or make a change or make something better. So the quote is Marcus Aurelius: when you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love. And that is always in the back of my mind.
That's a good one.
And the other one, totally different, but it's just around what we've been talking about, and it probably, I think I've brought it, it comes from one of my blogs. I tend to blog fairly regularly, like I write on a lot of these topics. I try to go, at least once a month. And this one is: having a culture where psychological safety is supported and valued can assist psychosocial hazard management. Increasing trust and open dialogue in the workplace can help support the implementation of risk reduction strategies associated with psychosocial safety. So it's a bit of a, there's a lot of big words in there, but it's basically it's around the psychological safety coming, being imperative to really having the psychosocial hazard management in place.
I like I will not exactly sort of polar opposites, but one more detailed and one more on the philosophical sort of like slant, but are both really quite good. And what's the best way for people to find out about you? Where do they go online? Like we'll have this in the description too, but what's your website?
So my website is sunrisewell.com.au. You can find me there. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm on there quite a lot and posting very regularly, much to the chagrin of probably some of my connections. They're probably like, oh my God, when is she going to stop talking about this? But
they just wish that they were posting as much.
So you can find me there. And if it's okay, I have a workplace wellbeing health check people can grab. I don't know if you those things. They can sort of, it's a on the spot kind of tick the box check of just a snapshot basically of how they perceive their workplace in terms of the well-being in their workplace. It obviously does not replace a survey done with their team members, but what would be really interesting would be if they did that snapshot and then they surveyed their team and see some kind of
that would be really interesting, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Would be, that might tell them quite a bit.
fly on the wall, see like the differences, the Apollo, like you're saying one thing here and you're saying, and that in itself says a lot of things, I guess, doesn't it?
Yeah, might show a few holes in what they are thinking, trust. Or it might reinforce
lack of trust or whatever.
Yeah. Or they might be happily surprised as well. So
no, that's right. Yeah, it's not all bad, is it? Let's not put that slant on it. Okay. So it's been really interesting. You've I always sort of generally try to flesh things out in terms of things that often I don't try to remember that I think I know stuff, but then when I come across different terms and like areas like yours that, sort of like a lot of people you have some experience in, but like it's pretty surface level. So it's been really great to explore some of that. And thanks for explaining everything really, really well. And I hope everyone listening's has learned something new. If you're even if you're not a lifelong learner like Ruth, although I think a lot of people probably are, especially if they're business owners. A lot of people, even if they don't label themselves that way, they probably are.
I would say so, probably.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I know I am. Any parting words for everyone, Ruth?
Oh, look, feel free to reach out. Feel free to just get in contact, either just connect with me to say hello, or, if you've got specific questions, I'm more than happy to jump on a call and have a chat. I'm more than happy to speak with you. So feel free to get in contact. And I just want to say thank you, Saul, for having me. It's been really interesting to talk with you. You've got great questions.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thanks. And thanks everyone for listening yet again to our little podcast, and we'll see you again soon. Say goodbye to everyone, Ruth.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. See you, everyone. Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of Grow Your Business. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time here at the Grow Your Business podcast.